On this episode of Newt's World, Vice President JD Vance attended an AI summit meeting in France on Tuesday, hosted by France and India. In his opening address, he described his vision of a coming era of American technological domination. He said, quote, "The Trump administration will ensure that the most powerful AI systems are built in the U.S. with American design and manufactured chips." Here to discuss the AI summit, I'm really pleased to welcome back my guest, Neil Chilson. He's a lawyer, computer scientist, and author of the book, Getting Out of Control, Emergent Leadership in a Complex World. As head of the AI policy at the Abundance Institute, Chilson works to create a policy and cultural environment where emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence, can develop and thrive. Neil, welcome and thank you for joining me again on Newt's World.
It's great to be back.
Before we get into AI, tell us just for a minute about the Abundance Institute.
Yeah, so the Abundance Institute is a mission-driven nonprofit. We're focused on the policy and the culture around emerging technologies and making sure that the policy and cultural environments let emerging technologies get full-throated market tests to try to solve the problems that we know that historically that technology can do to create widespread human prosperity. So we do that in lots of different ways, including policy at the federal and the state level in the U.S.
When you think about emergent technologies beyond artificial intelligence, what else do you think about?
There's so much. We have quantum computing, which is another new model for computing that could be super fast and super exciting. It's still in the very early days. There's things like biotechnology. There's so much in that space about how to design new drugs custom to individual bodies and what a drug looks like in the future. It could be quite different. And so those are some of the new ones that are coming up. There's all these new areas in energy that are really exciting. Abundance Institute right now is very active in the policy space around small modular reactors, which are small, safe nuclear reactors that can power essentially a data center, to get back to the AI topic, or other small uses. Yeah, so we're very excited about all of those.
Do you also look at robotics?
Robotics is a key part of moving from the world of bits to the world of atoms, and robotics has played a big role already in manufacturing. And with these new generative AI models and deep machine learning models that we can do, the things that robotics can do are becoming much more expansive as well. Very excited about robotics as well.
Well, now, specifically on the AI topic, on February 10th and 11th, France hosted the Artificial Intelligence Action Summit, where notable world leaders, including U.S. Vice President JD Vance, showed up. Can you give us an overview of the France AI conference, which I noted was also co-hosted by India? What was its main purpose and what were some of the key takeaways?
So this is the third in a series of international summits that have happened in the wake of the popularization of ChatGPT and all the innovation that has kicked off. And this one shifted a little bit. The two previous ones were called AI safety summits, and they really focused on how do we make sure this technology is safe? And they were driven largely by this fear of catastrophic risk from AI systems. This is sort of the Terminator scenarios that people think about. And there were some agreements that came out of those in the UK and Seoul, Korea, that were voluntary pledges from some of the companies, the leading companies, but then signed on to by a bunch of the different countries as well. It seems like that storyline, that fear, that concern has shifted as people have seen the rise of U.S. companies, the dominance that the U.S. has had in this space, and just the excitement and the potential for this technology. I think a lot of the other countries of the world are less worried about safety, and they're a lot more worried about getting left behind. How do they build a space that has this type of innovation? How do they make sure that their citizens benefit from it? And so the emphasis, I think, at this summit was ideas around inclusion or widespread availability of the technology. And JD Vance certainly brought a very different perspective to this than the Biden administration had brought to the previous two. Really barn burner of a speech that was pro-American, that really emphasized the fact that the path to AI innovation is not through heavy regulation, but one through deregulation. And he urged the European Union to take that path if they wanted to be part of the future.
He picks up on this in his speech. Where we have really in the United States emphasized innovation, the Europeans on a whole range of issues have emphasized regulation. And part of the result is, I think, with the exception maybe of 2 Chinese companies, virtually every trillion-dollar company in the world is American. There are no competitors in Europe for whole sections of this, and efforts by the Europeans to punish us by creating fines and other kind of things is just going to backfire, particularly with the Trump administration, which will respond, I think, very aggressively to that kind of narrow-minded policymaking.
And they certainly did. JD Vance specifically called out fines and regulations that had been unfairly applied, almost unfairly created specifically to target large American companies. And he said the U.S. wasn't going to tolerate that anymore. And he also made a strong case that it's not good for the European Union either and for their economy as well. So it was a very strident speech. The Biden administration had in many cases worked with the European Union to enforce European laws against American companies. And that was certainly a different tack that the Trump administration is taking.
The long tide of history is sort of leaving Europe behind. I'm a European historian by training. I've lived in France, Germany, Belgium, and Italy. And I love the continent, but I'm watching it sort of commit technological suicide.
The moment that gelled this for me the most in the AI space was the cheery signing of the European Union AI Act, which was signed about a year ago now and is starting to go into effect. That was their big moment. They really celebrated the fact that they had passed this very comprehensive regulation that is now looking quite unworkable because the technology has already left behind a bunch of it. For example, they had been working on this pre-ChatGPT and they had to sort of like retrofit how the regulation of generative AI technologies like ChatGPT into this big regulatory structure they'd already designed. And the world has already moved on even since that final text was finalized. And I think they're figuring it out. And there was a lot of discussion at this Paris summit about how do they maybe dial back some of this regulatory pressure in order to get their own national champions.
The so-called Statement on Inclusive and Sustainable Artificial Intelligence for People and the Planet, which apparently was signed by about 60 countries, but both the United States and the United Kingdom refused to sign it. Now, what was that all about?
There was a series of statements. Like I said, at the previous summits, there were statements that were similar. Those ones were much more focused on safety issues. And I think the main reason, first of all, like all of these international things, they don't say a ton, right? A lot of it is sort of like very positive words about where we want to go, not really operational in how we're going to get there. But there was a definite shift in emphasis for this one. And I think it left nobody happy, really. The people who are worried about existential risk hated this statement because they thought it didn't address their ideals. People from the Trump administration, I think, are rightly skeptical of like this language of inclusion to the extent that that might drive some sort of international or national mandates about how the technology is deployed. And I think the people who signed it are largely the people who have not been building these overwhelmingly great products. And so it's not clear what effect it would have on the other countries. And so I think maybe, I shouldn't say this without knowing it for sure, but I think maybe I had heard that China did sign it. I should double check that. And so for them, it may be a way to help bolster their relations with Europe, who they, I think, probably see as, if the Europeans are going to continue to suppress American companies, perhaps it's a new market for China to get in their cheap AI models.
The nice thing about China is they can sign anything, but they don't intend to enforce it. They get to be at the press conference and get their picture taken, and then they go about doing whatever they want to in the first place. There's this entire emerging pattern where folks go from fancy hotel to fancy hotel to have big meetings talking about big ideas with big words, none of which relates to reality. Except they keep inventing more and more multinational organizations which have to hire their friends and relatives so they can have meetings where they talk about things that have no connection with reality. And it's almost like an industry.
Oh, it's definitely an industry. I think there's a lot of academic conferences that are basically exactly what you described over and over. So it certainly is an industry. And in the AI space, this is the hot topic. But we've seen international stylings of things like this around privacy, et cetera. Sometimes it's good to get on the same page with everybody and figure out like how people can secure human rights across borders. But I don't think that this particular document really moves the ball very much towards anything that's productive.
I think what JD did there was a really important mark in terms of his own evolution as a national leader. And I thought it was worth listening just for a bit.
Now, our administration, the Trump administration, believes that AI will have countless revolutionary applications in economic innovation, job creation, national security, healthcare, free expression, and beyond. And to restrict its development now will not only unfairly benefit incumbents in the space, it would mean paralyzing one of the most promising technologies we have seen in generations. Now, with that in mind, I'd like to make 4 main points today. Number 1, this administration will ensure that American AI technology continues to be the gold standard worldwide, and we are the partner of choice for others, foreign countries, and certainly businesses as they expand their own use of AI. Number 2, we believe that excessive regulation of the AI sector could kill a transformative industry just as it's taking off, and will make every effort to encourage pro-growth AI policies. And I like to see that deregulatory flavor making its way into a lot of the conversations this conference. Number 3, we feel very strongly that AI must remain free from ideological bias, and that American AI will not be co-opted into a tool for authoritarian censorship. And finally, number 4, the Trump administration will maintain a pro-worker growth path for AI, so it can be a potent tool for job creation in the United States. And I appreciate Prime Minister Modi's point. AI, I really believe, will facilitate and make people more productive. It is not going to replace human beings. It will never replace human beings. And I think too many of the leaders in the AI industry, when they talk about this fear of replacing workers, I think they really miss the point. AI, we believe, is going to make us more productive, more prosperous, and more free. The United States of America is the leader in AI, and our administration plans to keep it that way.
Now, you recently tweeted about Vice President JD Vance's speech at the AI Summit in Paris, calling it, quote, one of the most pro-innovation speeches you've ever heard from an elected politician. What stood out to you in his remarks?
What stood out is it was the first time that I can remember that the U.S. has stood up to European regulators and said, hey, this is not the path towards innovation and progress. That really stood out. He also pointed out the connection, for example, between AI and energy and how linked those two topics are, and that Europe has been kneecapping itself in energy policy by essentially deindustrializing in some ways. And that's grown their reliance on providers such as Russia. And he pointed to that as a big problem. The other thing that I loved about his speech was he pointed out, we often think about AI and software as being part of the laptop class, right? That the people who build these things are people who sit behind laptops and type into computers, and that it's in the world of bits. And he pointed out that AI and computation takes large data centers, which are enormous construction projects that involve lots of hard hat workers who are plumbers and electricians and skilled labor. And so I really liked his pointing out that this is good for jobs, not just in the tech space, but this is good for blue collar jobs all over. The types of investment that the US has, private companies have been pouring into building data centers in order to meet the demands of the software space have been a really big construction investments, infrastructure investments. And I really liked him pointing that out.
When you talk about artificial intelligence and you're watching it, how do you think it's going to manifest itself in terms of the average small company or the average individual?
So artificial intelligence is a general purpose technology. And I think sometimes the very name of it kind of conceals more than it reveals. I like to think of it just as advanced computing. But the way I think that a lot of these new tools are going to manifest themselves are by making the boring parts of the types of content creation or analysis that people do a lot easier. And so you're tracking all of your accounting for taxes and you're not quite sure how to categorize different things. This is a type of tool that can easily categorize different things just by asking it. And so, whereas right now you have to learn the interface of any software program by figuring out like which buttons to click and what commands to type in, I think this is going to add a lot of more conversational. So you can just ask the software, like, how do I do this thing I'm trying to do in natural language? And it will help you navigate things like that. So I think those are some of the very direct ways. I think less directly, more behind the scenes, I think everybody's going to be impacted by how this affects medicine. These tools are already showing remarkable ability to diagnose, say, CAT scans or mammograms with extremely good accuracy in far advance of where humans are able to do that. And they can spot problems early, and that's going to make people's lives healthier and safer.
With all this talk about crossing borders, when you look at emergent consumer technologies like the cell phone, they just cross the border because people buy them. They suddenly become worldwide because, in fact, they're a better outcome for normal people. I mean, aren't we going to see, in that sense, an extraordinary spread of artificial intelligence capabilities just because they're so enhancing to what we can do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're already seeing this. ChatGPT was the fastest growing app that has ever been deployed by a lot. It had 100 million users within 2 months. And so there's a real hunger for using these types of tools. And I think they are spreading wildly. And I think that's part of why we have these international summits around AI, where I think in the similar timeline for, say, the internet or the automobile or, say, the telephone, I don't think you saw international summits because people are so excited about what AI can deliver that everybody wants to figure out how to benefit.
But also there's now sort of an international information ecosystem so that every place on the planet has some connectivity in a way that would not have been true in 1800 or 1900 or even 1980. Let me switch gears for just a second, because one of the stories, which is slightly confusing, has been the whole issue about DeepSeek, the Chinese artificial intelligence company, which has gotten a lot of controversy. Now, they were claiming that they used OpenAI's technology to develop this brand new, inexpensive, fabulous model that leapfrogs everything that's going on. What's your sense of that whole story?
So DeepSeek was a venture fund, a financial firm in China, and they used a bunch of compute that they had to develop these new models. And so there is a controversy about how much they did something called distillation. And this is a tool where you ask a bunch of questions to somebody else's model and you use those answers to help train your own model. And OpenAI says that they have some evidence that DeepSeek did this for one of their what's called a reasoning model, the R1 model that they have. I think that's a problem. It's a problem that's relatively easy for companies like OpenAI to solve by screening who their customers are and setting their terms of service. But I think it's also a pretty useful tool often. And most importantly, I don't think it is the primary innovation that DeepSeek developed. Some of their other innovations around streamlining the process, the algorithms that they use to be more efficient, those are real innovations. And the great thing is, honestly, that they released those and told everybody about them. So US companies are going to be able to retrofit those innovations back into their own software as well. And so overall, I think what DeepSeek reminds us is that, it's not inevitable that the US is going to lead this technology, that we need to, step up. We need to continue to innovate. The American system is very strong in this space. Our funding mechanisms, private funding, our markets, and our tech talent are really strong, but we can't rest on our laurels and sit back. This is a fast-moving space, and we need to move faster.
From your perspective, did you see DeepSeek as a real leap forward or simply a very clever development of existing capabilities?
So its final models are not better than the cutting edge models in the US. They are on par with the cutting models in the US. So the advancements that DeepSeek reached are more in the how do you implement these things in a way that's less expensive. It's actually a very common model for Chinese innovation, taking something that the US has innovated, has created, and doing it cheaper, faster, or at bigger scale. And so I don't see it as a giant leap forward. I see it as an incremental improvement. And I think some of the techniques that they used are going to help other companies move forward as well. But yeah, it's a spur to US innovators to stay on top of things.
You posted on X that DeepSeek's success reminds us that the AI race is global. What do we have to do to make sure we win it?
Well, in many cases, what we need to do is keep doing what we're doing, but make sure we don't get in our own way as well. We talked a lot about the sort of European model being proved that people are growing increasingly skeptical of it. Unfortunately, in the US, we have people who are advancing those types of models, especially at the state regulatory level. So we have over 350 AI regulatory bills that have been introduced around the states already this session. And there's just an avalanche of this stuff coming in, including in red states like Texas, for example. I'm flying down to Austin to talk to some people about these bills. And I think the lesson that we need to take is that we need to continue to double down on the American model of permissionless innovation. Copying the European model of regulation or the Chinese model of centralized control and command is just not going to work for the US. And what has been working in the US has been working really well.
Ultimately, does the federal government need to make this a federal issue for the national economy rather than have it broken up and micromanaged by 50 states?
I think AI and AI development, especially at the model level, is a federal issue. The types of concerns that it might raise around national security in particular are obviously federal issues. And so I think outside of even the legal, whether or not this is an interstate or international issue, I think from a policy perspective, this is the type of space that the president should step forward and say, this is important enough to the US that we need to be thinking about this on the national level rather than creating a patchwork of 50 different regulatory environments that will slow down innovation and will especially harm the smaller innovators and people who are trying to deploy this day to day and get the benefits from these technologies.
Do you think that the way forward for us will be collaborative with other countries, or will we just, in the sense that Google and Facebook, now Meta, Microsoft, Apple, these were all American companies that then spread worldwide? As you look at how AI will probably evolve, to what extent do you think it will be American-driven and then adopted overseas? And to what extent do you think it will be collaborative?
So I think it will be American-driven and adopted overseas. We have a lead at this point. And if we continue to develop this technology and make it accessible to the world, I think we will be the leaders across the world, that it will be our standards and our technology that get adopted. There are some threats to that, however. We have some concerning rules that, for example, the Biden administration put in just before he left office, something called the diffusion rule that focuses on AI chips. And it tries to deal with some real concerns about, say, China misusing these technologies. But it puts a lot of burdens on countries that are strong allies and completely non-threats. So we're talking everybody from Israel to Portugal have to follow these what are called tier 2 rules to get chips that are US manufactured. And I just don't understand the strategic model for that. Most of the world, other than a small select group of countries, are going to have to go through a lot more paperwork to just get US technology. And I don't think that really helps our security model. And I think it actually means that it's a market opportunity for China if they are able to develop these kinds of chips.
Do you think we may actually restrict ourselves in our ability to dominate markets?
I do. And another example of this is DeepSeek's model, for example, is what's called open weights, which means anybody can download these weights and use them on their own computer, on their own software. This type of open source development is really important, and it's really useful to researchers and startups who don't want to spend to train their own models. And if we in the US restrict the ability of open weight or open source development, which some of our policies have some implication of doing so, we could lose that market in the world. And I think that would be bad because somewhat uniquely to technology, these AI models embody values. They're based on language. And so when they're trained in the West, they have more Western values. And when they're trained in China, for example, the DeepSeek models struggle to tell you anything critical about Chinese government. And they won't even talk about Tiananmen Square and things like that. And so I think it's to the benefit of U.S. security and influence on the world to have our open source models be the ones that are adopted around the world.
OpenAI, how much does that fit that model?
So OpenAI, despite the name, they have some open source technologies, but overwhelmingly they are a closed source business where you subscribe or sign up for an account and then use the technology that they are providing rather than downloading it to your own machine and using it. And that's a totally viable and important business model. It's not that open source is the only way we should be doing this stuff, but OpenAI's business model right now is not an open source model.
So it doesn't fit. Tell us for a minute about this whole rivalry between Elon Musk and Sam Altman. I mean, it's almost like a soap opera. They co-found OpenAI in 2015. Supposed to be a nonprofit. Musk leaves in 2019. Altman launches a for-profit subsidiary, which has made it remarkable. And, Musk is now clearly offering a hostile takeover in effect, supposedly leading a $97.4 billion fund to take it over. What is all this about?
It's such a complicated story. It's like a soap opera that's been going on for many seasons at this point. There was a lot of acrimony between Musk and the leadership of the OpenAI nonprofit. Musk was very concerned. His main focus with this was how can we build it fast to prevent sort of existential risk? And so to him, this wasn't so much about building a company. It was about this safety concern that he had. And I think he thought that some of the choices that were being made weren't the right choices to pursue that goal. Obviously, he has his own rival company, XAI, and as Altman is trying to transition OpenAI from a model that's a nonprofit model to a for-profit company, the way they're doing that is complicated and it has to value the assets of the nonprofit properly and compensate the nonprofit properly. I see Musk's bid here as largely a sort of lawfare. What is already a very complicated process of moving from a nonprofit to a for-profit that is, I think, the latest valuations worth potentially $300 billion. And I think Musk's bid is just raising the costs to do that. He's making it more complicated to do that. I don't know how serious the bid is. I mean, obviously, I think he could get the money together if Altman accepted it, but I don't think Musk had any supposition that Altman, or I should be clear, the board of the OpenAI Foundation would accept this offer. But it does make it more legally complicated for Sam Altman's continued transition of OpenAI to a for-profit company.
It's a fascinating story. And Musk at least implies that if he took it over, that they would be much more public and much more open. On the other hand, if that's true, how does he earn back the $97 billion?
Right. It's a tough thing. And I think they're somewhat plausible business models, but it does seem like he would have to spin out at some point a for-profit of his own or find some sort of funding mechanism to earn back that money. In some ways, the initial donations that Musk gave to OpenAI, and I don't think he really saw them as business investments, but those were a whole different scale than $97 billion. It's hard to get investors in to do charitable work at that scale.
That's what I was thinking. Neil, I want to thank you for joining me. I'm sure we're going to come back to you again in the future because the whole concept of the Abundance Institute is so much down the road of what I believe in and what I think is the future of the country. I want to let our listeners know they can find out more about the work you're doing as the head of the AI policy at the Abundance Institute by following you on X at Neil_Chilson or by visiting your website at abundance.institute. And we'll list all that on our webpage. And I'm really grateful you took the time to talk to us.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you to my guest, Neil Chilson. You can learn more about the Abundance Institute on our show page at newtsworld.com. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Penley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcast and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newt's World can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at Gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.